Welcome. I am super excited that you are wanting to make a quilt. Whether this is the first quilt you've ever made or you just want to try out this pattern, I'm glad that you are interested in the Better Together quilt pattern. And I wanted to provide a pattern unlike a pattern I'd seen before. When I first started quilting, I got a little frustrated with some of the terminology and just not knowing what I was doing. So here I am creating a video tutorial to walk with you step by step through making this quilt. And I wrote the pattern just a little bit different, kind of assuming no prior knowledge, just that you're brand new to quilting. So wherever you are on your journey, I'm really excited to have you here. First off, let's go through the materials that you're gonna need to make this quilt. So I've printed off the pattern just as you have it. And if we go through the list together, first you need a self-healing mat. And that I have right here. They come in different colors, shapes, sizes. And the biggest you can get, the better, because it gives you a little more cutting space. And basically a self-healing mat, it's like a hard foam. It's the texture, and it works well with the next thing on your list, which is a rotary cutter. The rotary cutter is a sharp circular tool to cut your fabric. And if you use it on a normal surface, you can damage the surface and you can damage your blade. So the self-healing mat, they work well together. As far as the rotary cutter goes, I prefer the Olfa brand, but you can use whatever brand you can get access to. This is a 45 millimeter. That's the size of the circle, and that's what I would recommend. Next, you'll need a sewing machine, and just any machine that works. It doesn't need to be fancy, it just needs to work. The next thing on the list is thread. And I recommend using white thread. It's kind of a universal, hides everything, easy to find. And I recommend cotton 50 weight thread. Then you'll need a pencil. You can use a pen, a pencil, any kind will do really. And then a quilting ruler. If you're gonna get just one ruler, I would get a 6.5 inch by 24.5 inch ruler. That's what this is. You'll notice this one is see-through. I definitely recommend that so you can see the fabric underneath. I also love this particular brand is Creative Grids. And if you look, it has these little dots, and along the edge, it's some texture so that when you're putting your ruler down to cut, it holds your fabric and the ruler in place so that your cuts are more accurate, because there's nothing worse than going to cut and the ruler moves a bit and then your cut is off. So I like that. Also, with this particular pattern, we're making a lot of those half square triangle shapes. This ruler is a really nice treat. So in the directions, and I'm going to go over how to use just a normal ruler to trim your half square triangles. But if you can treat yourself, this ruler is amazing. I'll see if I can get close. It's Quilt in a Day. It's a 6.5 inch triangle square up ruler. And I will go through in the videos how to use this. And you will see that it saves a lot of time. So think about treating yourself to that. The next thing you'll need is some pins, nothing fancy, just to hold your fabric together. The required fabric, it's 11 fat quarters. And if you don't know the measurement of a fat quarter, that's also written in the fabric area. It's 18 inches by 22 inches. But if you go online or to a fabric store and just put in a fat quarter or tell them a fat quarter, they'll know what that measurement is. And just choose 11 different fabrics that you want to work with. For your background fabric, you'll need 2.5 yards, 2.25. Did I say 2.5? 2.25 yards. Although I did put a note in there that you never regret getting a little extra fabric. Sometimes you make a mistake. I know I have, and I like to have a little extra fabric on hand in case of a little oopsie-daisy. So that's the fabric that you need. You'll need an iron and an ironing board. I have mine right there. I like to keep it close to my machine. You don't have to. It's also a good excuse if you don't, that you can get up and move around. And then I have Wonder Clips. And these will be for the binding at the end. The binding is what goes around the edge of the quilt here. It's like the frame that goes around. And just to go over with the fabric, there is another 1/2 yard that you'll get for the binding, and that's on top of the fat quarters and the background fabric. And the backing is 3 yards of any fabric that you like. And the batting, that's what goes in the middle, in between. And you'll just need twin size. If you go to a fabric store or Amazon, somewhere online, you can buy the batting in a bundle, and it goes by twin, king, queen. You can just get twin size. If you're getting it off of a bolt and you need to get measurements, then get at least 72 inches by 90 inches. And that is all the materials and fabric that you need. So we will move on to the next part. If you have any questions along the way, shoot me an email at quilterscandybox@gmail.com. I'm happy to help you, and I'm excited to get moving on to the next step of our quilt. We are now going to start talking about cutting our fabric. And first, I'm going to start with the background fabric. So this, I've got white fabric that I'm going to use as the background fabric. I've got 2 1/4 yards of the background fabric. And what it's telling you to do here is to cut 8 8-inch by width of fabric strips. Now I have a little diagram here to help show you how to do this. And what this is replicating is my cutting table here. So I've got my background fabric, and this way it measures, get my ruler here, the width of the fabric. You're gonna see that it is folded in half. When you get it off the bolt from the fabric store, it's folded like that. So these are the selvages. It's the open ends that you don't use. So the selvages are touching, and it's folded in half. Here's the crease mark. And it should be 42 inches. We talk about in here that the width of fabric is assuming 42 to 44 inches. It's usually 44, but I like to say 42 because these inches we don't want to use. So the width of fabric is 42 inches. If I measure this, it should be half of 42 because it's folded in half. So roughly, yeah, it is. So with this on my cutting mat, just like so, I'm going to cut 8 strips. What was it? 8 strips that are 8 inches wide times width of fabric. So we already have the width of fabric here. So now we just need them to be 8 inches wide. I like to put my fabric a little bit over the edge to start with, because you can see that it's not cut totally together. So if I go ahead and cut right on this line here, I'll be short a little bit. So what I mean is, I'm gonna take my large ruler, and on the top, I'm gonna line this up with the 0. And then I'm gonna come down here and line this up with the 0 as well. Make sure again that at the top, oh, I moved a touch. Lined up with the 0. You always want to cut away from you. So you'll take your rotary cutter and you will cut. I'm doing this one-handed, so I'll actually have to put the camera down to do this. But I'll trim here, and I'm trimming away this edge that's not totally flat. And that way we can start off with a totally flat edge. You also want to make sure, in fact, I was going to say make sure the other edge is lined up. Don't do it with the selvages. Do it with this part of the fabric, the seam of the fabric, and I didn't do that yet. So I am going to take this seam and line it up all the way across on that dotted line. Okay, so we line up the fabric here, line up the fabric here, and we're going to trim that. And then we'll be ready to count 8 inches and cut 8 inches again and cut. We'll do that 8 times so that we get our 8 inch by width of fabric strips. Okay, and you can't see the full thing, but you'll get an idea. because I'm right-handed, it's easier to have my my left hand hold the ruler down and have my right hand do the rotary cutter. Okay, so now that that is lined up, again, I'm going to make sure this is all lined up. Okay, I'm lined up. And now we're going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And if you have heard the phrase, count twice, cut once, that is to avoid cutting your fabric and having it be the wrong measurement. So again, I've lined up the ruler at the top, at the bottom, and double count. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm gonna make sure it's pulled all the way over, lined up, and then we cut. And you can see that I'm kind of moving my hand along the ruler as we go so that it doesn't slide. And I like to pick up my fabric, before I'm done, in case I miss a little spot like that. The ruler's still there and I can cut it. So there's one of my 8 inches by width of fabric. We're gonna count 8 inches again, and each time I make sure that the fabric is lined up on this side and on this side. 1, 2, 3. Again, I like to pick it up and make sure it's all cut. Now see, the table underneath for filming purposes isn't quite the right size for this ruler. That's why I'm having a little bit of trouble. But there we go. We have 2. And we're gonna keep sliding this fabric down as we go. So let me line this up again with that dotted line. And then on this side, now that I've been trimming it, it's a nice straight line. And I'll go ahead and cut 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I guess I could just look at the 8-inch line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. Perfect. So we've got 3 of those. I'm gonna keep doing those, probably not on camera, but let me come around so we're looking at the same side. So we're gonna do 8 of those. Like I said, I've done a couple of them and I'll keep going. You don't need to watch as I do it. Then it says to cut 1 7¼ inch by width of fabric strip. So I'll do that with you. And for that, again, just make sure your fabric's lined up. And instead of cutting 8 inches, let me move my camera so you can see here. It's gonna be 7¼ inch. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And the nice thing about these cutting mats is they work for quilters, which we work in 1/4 inch segments generally. So there's a nice line there that is 1/4 inch. And it's 15¼ inch. So I'm gonna go to the top and make sure we're at 15¼ inch. And then again, double count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7¼ inch. Make sure that we're lined up on all sides. I have here my 7¼ inch strip. That's also the width of fabric. And now we're gonna subcut that into 5 pieces. Now keep in mind, this is layered. And so we really only need to cut 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, I guess we need to cut 3. So All right, I've made sure that it's lined up on the top and lined up on the side, and we do not want to use this selvage. So I'm going to just line my ruler up with this line right here and cut a straight line. Okay, and then we're going to cut and count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 1/4. I do really like that the mats work with quilters. These self-healing mats, they have it marked on the 1/4 inch because that's how we work as quilters, is 1/4 inches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 1/4 inch. So there's 2. And I, just for ease of use, I like to move this over a little bit so that I don't have to do some weird math in my head. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 1/4 inch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 1/4 inch. There's 4. All right, moment of truth. Do I need to open this and press it, or am I going to have enough? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, whew, and 1/4. It worked. And then we double count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 1/4. Okay, so now we have 6. We really only need 5, so I'll just take one and set it aside. And now we'll get ready for our next step. All right, and now we have our 8" times width of fabric strips. And you can see here it says to subcut your 8" by width of fabric strips into 40 8" squares. So that just means that we're going to take each one of those 8" strips and cut it the other way into 8" squares. Now, when I do this, I like to take a few strips at a time to save time, but it's tricky. You don't want to add too many because then it gets a little less accurate. So I'm going to start off with 2 strips at a time, and I'm going to take the first strip and line it up. And the tricky part is it's layered, so you want to make sure that the bottom layer is lined up and the top layer. And that's why the more that you add, the less accurate it gets. So I'm taking care with my hand to hold this fabric on the bottom in place while I lay this next one on top. I just want to peek. Okay, good. They're both layered. So now I'll take my ruler and I'm going to cut just right along this line here. It happens to be lined up right here. So that's a great place. I'm going to move this fabric underneath so that the ruler can get as flat as possible. Let me just move that. Okay, so now we'll line this up. I'll go ahead and trim it. And now we will cut 8 inches, or let's count just to make sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, 8 inches there. 1, 2. You can see it's not totally lined up on the bottom. I don't like that. So I'm going to see where the problem is. It looks like it's with this top layer. They might just not be cut totally exactly the same. All right, well, it's good enough. We have a little wiggle room built into this. So let's count again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We'll line that straight up and then double count again just to make sure we've got it right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Set those aside. And generally I like to not move the fabric as much as possible. So I'm going to leave that there and move my ruler. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So there we go. And then this, let me just look here. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it looks like I'll need to press this open. There's that crease from originally. I'm going to bring this to the sewing machine. I'm going to spray it with some water or some starch to get that crease out. And then I'll cut another 8 inches. So let me go do that. I'll be right back. Okay, I went and pressed the seam. It's pretty much gone. You can see it a little bit, but that's okay. So I'm going to line up again the fabric. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We're still good there. And I'm going to count 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We'll set it here. Double count again. Okay. We have next on our list, marking the fabric. And you're gonna notice that there's 2 different ways to do it. The first is with the 8-inch squares. You're gonna draw an X on the back. Now with my fabric, there is no front or back. They're the same. But let's say your background fabric does have a front and a back. Make sure it's the side that you do not want showing on the front of your quilt. That's where you're gonna mark it. Then with your 7-inch squares, you just make 1 line. So let me show you how I do this. I like to do it on my self-healing mat because it holds the fabric in place pretty well. These are my 7-inch squares. And before you mark it, I would just make sure that you have the right one so you're not over marking your fabric. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, those are my 7-inch. And we are just gonna make 1 line from corner to corner. And I usually use mechanical pencil, but this was close on hand. And just push your ruler down pretty firmly. And there you go. You just wanna make sure you can see the mark. The lighting is a little weird, but you can see that mark pretty well. You'll do that with all of your 7-inch. And with your 8-inch, this is a good time to listen to a book, have some good music, maybe a show in the background, because it's mindless. You have to pay attention enough to make sure that you're doing the right thing, but it's kind of a relaxing, repetitive thing. Okay, from corner to corner, again, I like to hold the ruler kind of in the middle. It holds the fabric in place. And you notice there it jumped a little bit. That's okay. With this, it got a little bit off. We're gonna be sewing a little 1/4 inch away from this drawn line. So if it's a little bit messy, it's okay. Even if you use a marker or a pen, you're not gonna see this. You're gonna cut on this line eventually. So don't worry too much about, I'd worry more about not drawing on the surface underneath than on the fabric. Okay, so your 8-inch, you've got the X, 7-inch, you have one line, and do that for all of your background fabrics. And then when these are ready, we will move on to the next thing. All right, we are ready now for the pinning. And you can see that we are going to pin the half square triangle and the background fabric right sides together. So that means, if you recall, we drew on the wrong side of our background fabric. So this is the right side. So this is the right side, this is the right side. The right side is the fabric you want showing on your quilt top. So we place those together face to face. And now for pinning, I like to have the X showing. And you take your pins. Keep in mind, you're going to be sewing just outside of this drawn line. So don't put your pins right on the drawn line. I put them in the middle. That way it gives me enough space to sew. And I put 4 pins just to hold this nicely in place. And again, it doesn't matter what kind of pins you use as long as they get the job done. So there we go. That's the 8-inch. You do that for all of your 8-inch background and half square triangle pieces. Then with the 7-inch, here's the right side facing up and the right side. We place them together, match them up. And again, you're going to be sewing away from that line. So I put the pins kind of on the corners to hold it in place the best I can. Just like that. And now we have that pinned. So we are going to do that for all of our 7-inch and all of our 8-inch pieces. And when those are ready, we will take these to the sewing machine. We are at the sewing machine now, and we are going to sew according to the directions, 1/4 inch away from this drawn line on both sides of the drawn line. So I like to chain piece at this point, which means I'm going to take all of my 8-inch squares and sew 1/4 inch right here, take my next square and sew 1/4 inch from that drawn line. Do that with all of the pieces, then cut them, cut all those little lines, flip it, so there will be a sewn line right here. And then I'm gonna sew this one all the way through, take the next one and sew it all the way through. That way I'm not having to sew, stop, turn it, sew, stop, turn it. It just makes it go a little bit quicker. But with that said, let me show you what it's going to look like on one complete square. So a couple of things to help with this. This tape, I should probably get some new one. It's kind of starting to come off. But I like to use this tape. It's by Cluck Cluck Sew. That's the name of her company. And you can put it on your sewing machine where it measures 1/4 inch this way from where the needle, this red line is exactly where the needle is going to go. This is 1/4 inch away on this side, 1/4 inch away on this side. I also have, if you can see with my presser foot, it's a little bit hard to tell, but there's a little part of my presser foot right here, and that is the 1/4 inch line. So for me, if I know that I'm going to sew 1/4 inch away from this line, I will have this right here that's 1/4 inch away. I'll keep this drawn line exactly where that goes. Or you can keep it on this 1/4 inch line right here. So, ooh, risky putting my finger under the needle. Okay, so I am going to put this drawn line right where that 1/4 inch mark is and start sewing. And it's just a straight line. Now, like I said, if I were chain piecing, I would just grab my next square and push it right through and keep sewing. But I'm going to show you with this square what the entire square will look like when it's done. So we take that, and now And I want to show you this because you might notice that it's a little bit crinkly here. That is okay. That's going to happen, and it's normal, and we can still end up with our half square triangles being the right size. So with that said, let's sew this here. Even the best of us have little issues, and I'm kind of glad that this happened so I can show you guys that it's okay. Something with my thread was off a little bit, and I'm going to start on the other edge, but I don't generally start back here. I like to have the fabric a little bit behind where the needle hits it. My machine tends to just be happier with me when I do that. So hopefully that works. Yep, and this time my machine is fine. I'll cut my thread and then turn it over. Oh, we're going back to where the trouble was. Hope it goes well. And I started a little further away than normal this time just because it had issues, so that's why I backspaced a little bit there. And if you noticed while I was sewing, I kind of pulled the fabric just a touch because I know that it tends to get a little bit wrinkly and gathered here, so I pulled it just a touch to try and keep it a little bit more flat, but that's okay. You're going to notice this here, and that is okay. Here is this before. See how wrinkly it is where the X is? If I press it, but then I bring it back, and it's much better. So you can also press it before we trim. So take all of your 8-inch and 7-inch squares, sew on both sides of the drawn line, and then we will be ready for the next step. We are now at the part of the pattern where we are going to use a ruler and a rotary cutter, and we are going to trim and cut on this drawn line. The instructions, it does say see video tutorial. This is it, because there are a few ways after we get to that point to trim our half square triangle. So first, we are going to bring our 7-inch layered squares. We've done that to the sewing machine. With a ruler, we're going to cut it. Then open the triangle from step 3, press seams to the darker fabric. I'm going to show you that because that is what this talks about. But I'm also going to show you a quicker way to get to a 6.5-inch by 6.5-inch half square triangle. So let's do what is shown here. So we're going to take this here and trim right down the drawn line. And now, if we take the pin out and open it up, we've got a lovely half square triangle. Let's just see what it measures. When it says to press the seam, it shows this diagram. Press the seam to the darker fabric. In my case, it's the striped fabric, and it's going to be on the back. And right now I'm just going to finger press it. So that just means that the seam goes towards this fabric. So with that pressed, let's just see what we're measuring before trimming it. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's exactly 6.5. So there's a little bit of wiggle room at the bottom here where this is the 6.5-inch line and it comes over a little bit. So what we can do, according to this, go to the iron, which I will, press this over, and then we'll use a ruler to trim this. So let me go press this. Okay, I've gone and pressed it, and now we are going to, this is when I'm going to take, well, I'll use this larger ruler, and go across this top line and trim everything up. And then we've got the 6.5-inch line is right here. And it does go over just a touch. So you can see that that's the excess that we have there. It's better to have more and trim it down than to be too small, which we are pretty much right on the line here. And that's just trimming off the dog ear. The dog ear, kind of a weird term, but it's this little flap that sticks out. So where was I? Okay, and basically we're just going to trim that dog ear, so I'm going to use this little ruler and just trim that off. And now we have a perfect 6.5 inch by 6.5 inch half square triangle. Now remember, I talked about this beautiful ruler and how it saves time. Let me show you how it works. So I'm going to take that pin out. And we know that we want our half square triangle to be 6.5 inches. So we find the 6.5 inch line and we line it up exactly with the sewn seam. So not the edge, but on the sewn seam. 6.5 inch with 6.5 inch. We don't have to press the seams open or anything. And okay, it's lined up. I'm gonna come in here and just trim everything that's outside of that, which is not a lot. And now we can go to the iron and press. It even trims off the dog ears for you. And voila, you have your 6.5 inch by 6.5 inch triangle, and it's perfect. So that is my preferred method with this quilt in a day ruler. It just saves a lot of time. But if you don't have it, you can also get the job done with the larger ruler. Now, let's look at your 8 inch. Move these scraps out of the way. Your 8 inch square. You're going to take the pins out. And again, you are going to cut right on the X. And this time I actually do like to make sure that it's lined up on both sides, because after you cut on the X, you're going to take your ruler and cut halfway across right down the middle. So let me show you. And it's nice to not have to move your fabric when you do that. And remember, this is the one that got a little wonky here. So let's just keep an eye and see how that turns out. All right, we've cut there. We've cut there. And now, without moving anything, we can just follow this line that's right down the middle on the cutting mat. And also this line that goes right down the middle. And just put our ruler there. And we've got 8 half square triangles. Now, if you're going to use that quilt in a day ruler, let me just gather these up. Okay, these are going to be 3.5 inch. So we find the 3.5 inch line right here, and we are going to line that up with the sewn seam. So I'll lay that down, lay the 3.5 inch, and trim the excess. So if we press this, again, the darker the seam goes to the darker fabric, I would go to the iron and press it. Then when you're done, you can just trim these either with scissors or your rotary cutter. And I would do it all at once. So first trim, do all of the trimming, then go to the iron and do all of the pressing, then trim all of the dog ears. That just saves a little bit more time, streamlines things a bit. And that will leave you with the perfect 3.5 inch by 3.5 inch half square triangle. If you do not have the Quilt in a Day ruler, that's okay. And this Creative Grids one is nice because it has a line right down the middle. So this seam is pressed to the darker side. And with this ruler, it has a 3.5 inch and a 3.5 inch line. So I'm just gonna line this up, have this go right down the middle, and trim everything else. So, gonna have that corner go right to the 3.5 inch, keep that there. So notice that's 2 cuts. That's all I would have had to do with this ruler. But now I need to turn this and trim it the other way. So it really does cut your time in about half by using that Quilt in a Day ruler. And I find it to just be a little bit more accurate. So there you go. There's another way to get your 3.5 inch half square triangle. I now have all of my pieces laid out how I want them to be. And now we're gonna start sewing these rows together. And this is the best way that I could come up with, just because periodically we have these larger half square triangles mixed throughout the quilt. So what I do, I take the first 2 half square triangles and sew them together. And just note that there is going to be this space here. That's great. It's 1/4 inch, and that means that when you sew this next row together, the points should line up just exactly right on the corner. So don't worry when you see that. You're gonna see it all the way across. So I take these first 2 pieces, I sew them together, press the seams open. Then when I come back, I line up all my pieces. I take this and keep them on top and stack up my pieces. I'm gonna go all the way down. And yes, I get a pretty good workout as I do this because I'm up and down. So I'm gonna stack up all the pieces in order. And now I'm going to bring these over to my sewing machine. And I know it might seem tedious, but I do like to sew this together, then bring it down and set it down. Otherwise, I have gotten things out of order and out of place, and I've taken time to get them all just how I want them, so I don't want to get it out of order. So now when I come, I know that this is going to be the top piece, and then these are all in order. So I'm just going to one at a time sew them together. And I'm doing this one-handed, so I'll show you, but you take this, put them right sides together, and it'll look like this. And then I don't generally pin just because it's such a short area right here. In fact, I'm just gonna do this one-handed. And instead of pressing at this point, I'm just gonna add the next one. And I keep doing the entire row. And then when this row's done, I will press all the seams open at one time. And I'm gonna start using 2 hands now. Here is just a little update of how the progress is going on sewing my rows together. So this row, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, these are all sewn together. And then you can see where this block is. I stopped. I've sewn these 2 together like that. Then when you get down here, I've sewn these 2 together, stopped. So this row, this, and you can see this diagram in your pattern, but it just kind of shows how to break it up. Obviously here, I'm gonna sew these 2 together and then sew it to connect here. Then they'll be 4 blocks long and you can sew those together. It's just adding little by little. And so with this, we'll have to sew all of these together. So it'll be the same length as this. And then I just wanted to show you, I've sewn the first 2 blocks of each row together. And then, like I did before, I just pile these up, one on top of the other. It's one-handed, so it's a little messy. But then I bring it, oh dear, I missed the first one. So that would be on top. And then we put this pile here. And now I can just grab this pile and these 2, go to my sewing machine and sew that row and all along. And here, obviously I'll pause. And then I've continued the rows here. So I'd pick up this and bring this to the sewing machine. And these, I just did these together. So when the rows are all done, we'll move on to the next portion. When your rows are done and you're ready to sew them together, so you take your rows, put them right side together. It's going to look like kind of a little flower. And again, you can see that it, oh, I need to make sure this is in the camera perfectly there. So it matches up just right. You can open it up like a little flower. And again, if I'm sewing, I know that my machine's gonna come down this side and try and push the seams down. So I'm gonna put a pin right here. This side is naturally going that way, so the machine won't mess with those seams. Okay, let's see, I didn't grab the back there. Do that again. All right, we've got that. And then we just go down the whole way and pin those in place. Now, one thing, it shouldn't happen because we've trimmed all of our half square triangles to be the same size, but I am noticing it here, just a touch. I'm gonna pin this together and show you a potential issue. If you're matching your points, your corners to be just right, can you see how these aren't laying totally flat? It is because this top half square triangle is actually a touch longer than this bottom half square triangle. If that happens when you sew, just pull this a little bit tight. And when you open up your quilt top, it won't lay totally flat, but when you quilt it, it can hide that. It's not the end of the world. This isn't terrible. It happens to the best of us. But yeah, you just, see, pull it tight and it'll take care of that. And you keep going down the entire row and pin in place. But I like to finish one row, press the seams, lay it down, and then do the next 2. If I put 2 rows together, and bring all of them to machine at one time, unless I've taken a picture of my quilt top, I forget what order I've laid everything out in. So just for me, I do one at a time. But if you want to bring them all to your machine, pin these rows together, pin these rows, these, and so on, you can do that. I would just take a picture of your quilt top so when you open up all of your rows to lay them back down to pin the next little bunch, they're still in the order that you wanted them to be in. We are sewing our rows together now, and I like to just peek sometimes and make sure that the fabric underneath is facing the right direction. On my first couple, you can see the fabric got pushed, which is not what I wanted to do. I probably won't unpick it and go back, but the machine was struggling to get through. I was like, what was going on? So I looked, sure enough, that's what happened. So before you get to the point where the seams line up, just take a peek. Make sure it's facing the right way. Before the needle goes over your pin, pull out the pin. Peek now. Oh, that one was struggling to go the wrong way. But yeah, if you do that, you should just be able to go through. And then after this, you'll press your seams open. And you will want to press your seams open just because of all the bulk of all the fabric gathering at those points. You just so long.